And now, recorded in front of absolutely nobody in their subterranean recording studio deep in the bowels of the Cigar Club of Indiana, it's time for the Five Stones Podcast.
Welcome to the Five Stones Podcast. We are back one more time to impart our knowledge and wisdom upon you, our generous listeners. And I am Raymond Modulin, a.k.a. the Real Estate Monkey. And as always, I am joined by my two faithful hosts. Joe, how are you today?
I am Dandy. I am Joe, the Real Estate Advocate.
Followed by...
Good morning. I am Colin Hedegaard, the Great Dane, and the owner of Five Stones Mortgage.
So we're here today. And first of all, I'd like to just see, I'm still... like Joe is always accusing me of, the monogamist with my cigars, still doing the New World Maduro. What are you guys enjoying?
This is a new release from CAO called a FASA.
Oh.
It is okay.
I have a Habano AJ Fernandez. So
this one's a stout Maduro. And it's actually pretty good. There's an orange one that's a little less good, but this is a...
So it's funny. Let's talk about something real quick. Colin, do you typically leave the band on your cigar? That's always a question that for some reason people have an innate curiosity about do you leave the band on when you smoke your cigar?
I don't always leave the band on, but I usually leave it on until I smoke it till about here, and then I take it off, and then I smoke the cigar till about here.
Yeah. I always take the band off first.
So do I.
I find it hard when it gets that low to get my hand that close to the flame. It's a little warm, so I'm always taking mine off first to do that. But for some reason, people that are not cigar smokers tend to ask that question a lot. Do you leave it on? Do you take it off? I tell them sometimes people leave it on, especially if it's a nicer cigar. Somebody may want, their friends to see that it's a nicer cigar. Some people also use it, like Colin had just kind of mentioned, as a trigger to, where you should smoke the cigar down to. Some people smoke it just to the top and they're done. Some go way down to the very end where they got to use an actual roach clip to get to the very end.
Well, there are people that suggest that leaving it on there and smoking the cigar, the heat from the cigar releases the adhesive in it and it's easier to take off. I've never really had that issue. I just got in the habit of taking it off because I will smoke in my truck and I don't want to have to be fumbling around with a band on a cigar while I'm driving a truck. So yeah. I take it off, I can smoke, and I don't have to worry about it.
So I think technically there's no preference. It would just be the personal preference. If you're out there listening and you're getting into cigars, that would probably be the best thing. It's just your personal preference.
Well, I would submit to you, if someone's giving you a hard time about how you do it, just reach out and slap them and continue to enjoy the cigar however you choose to enjoy it.
Once in a while, when I take the band off, a piece of it sticks to the wrapper and it might damage the wrapper a little bit as I peel it off or peel it. Then that bothers me for the entire, hour and a half. So I wait till later. And
yeah.
then if it damages the cigar,
I think that what Joe's saying, that heat will loosen that adhesive so that won't happen. So that might be a good point. But other than that, I'm going to tell any beginning cigar smokers, it's really pretty much your preference. I know that I do it mainly because my cigars come individually wrapped. So while I'm standing somewhere where I can throw the wrapper away and the foot wrapper, I might as well just do the band right there all at one time so that I have it. Plus, I smoke the same cigar, so I always know what I've got. There are people that collect the wrappers. There are people that go, what am I smoking? And look at it. So it's personal preference, which leads us to today's topic that we are going to elaborate a little bit more on, is the auctioning or the potential auctioning of real estate. rather than do it the quote unquote traditional method of a listing, let's talk about the auctioning of real estate. And is that something that you guys see coming in the future? Is that just a different method? You know, some houses may fit better to an auction rather than the standard method. Now, I know, Colin, your wife is actually a licensed auctioneer.
She is, so I'm obviously interested in a different way in auctioning real estate. I think that real estate transactions are always, in a sense, an auction anyways. You're taking bids, and the highest bid is going to win most commonly. So in a way, it's already been an auction. But it is
So
a
then
market, it is an auction.
why do we need an auction license or an auctioneer?
Well, that's a fair question. I don't think that you do to auction your own stuff. But the things that an auctioneer brings is an audience and a marketing system and other things that maybe aren't in place for an individual that wants to sell their own house. So that it's a different technique of marketing. And sorry, my messages are blowing up.
I would tell you that I would submit that it's very similar to what we're going through now as a real estate broker. You know, you're trying to give someone an option, but I mean, the reality is they could sell their house on their own. They could do an auction on their own. But what you're doing is you're bringing in someone that theoretically should know more what they're doing. You know, why do people go somewhere to have them change the oil in their car? They could change their oil at home. They may not know how to do it as well. So you got to go find the person that has the knowledge, and I think that helps.
So that's a good point. What is the advantage to an auction as opposed to just putting a for sale by owner sign in my yard?
Well, I can tell you a little bit about conceptually how real estate works. It's working this way in some other markets, but it takes some time to culture a market into looking at it as an alternative to a traditional listing. So traditional listing, I list the house for 400. It sells. I pay a couple of agents. I net out 380, whatever the number is, right? It sits on the market for a period of time. We take offers. We accept an offer. In certain markets, that's a week. In other markets, it's 3 months, whatever. And then a month after that, typically you have a closing, and then the payouts exist. The way an auction would be, I imagine it being presented as an alternative, is that how about we auction the house if you're comfortable with, if you want to set a reserve, whatever, but we will get offers and sell the house 45 days from today. So it's not going to be on the market for 3 months or 6 months if you wanted to sell at the hammer price. The other interesting thing is that the seller gets the full hammer price, and the premium can be, it doesn't have to work this way, but the way I envision it is that the seller gets the full hammer price of the auction ending. And then there's a buyer's premium charged to the buyers, in which is divvied up to pay real estate agents and pay other parties and pay marketing and all that. So there is a fee to the auctioneer, but that fee is shared with real estate. So in that sense, it would be a way to say, look, seller, maybe we want to list it and do it this way, or perhaps we want to try this, where you're going to get the full hammer price. The auctioneer is going to pay the agents. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You're just going to sell your house in 45 days. Might go for 380. It might go for 450. There is a phenomenon in auctioning where human nature takes over and you just want to win, So I don't know how that translates to real estate, but in other auctions where I, watch things and buy them, something happens that you want to compete and you want to win and you don't want to lose that opportunity. So,
yeah. Now, first of all, though, let's talk about, and correct me, Colin, you may know, there's two different types of auctions. One is like that sealed bid auction where it's everybody puts in one bid, they're all opened at one time, and whoever's the highest bid, providing it meets the reserve, is actually the winner. That's like a closed auction in my head. There's this other type, which more people are probably associated with auction, where your wife has a license and is allowed to go, give me 5, give me 10, and people can change their bid, raise their bid. They also get to hear what the other person bids, which is, I think, that phenomenon you're talking about where, hey, that guy just outbid me by 10 grand. I'm going to beat him and go higher. So,
yeah, I think real estate is less of an impulse buy than, jewelry or furniture and stuff like that. So I don't know what will be the more effective method. We're in the research phase of this right now, but perhaps there's a couple of days where you take the offers. Perhaps there's a 3-week span where you take highest offers, or perhaps you can just set up that day and at 12 o'clock, we're going to start letting people raise their hands and offer money. And things get done both ways. We've all seen, the car auctions. They're in town right now, the Meekum, and they pull a car up and you feel that pressure. Now's my moment. I got 45 seconds to decide if I want to spend $400,000 for this classic car, and the pressure hits, and so there's a lot of psychology to an auction. There's a lot of moving parts. It's not as simple as it looks, because all the prep work has been done. All the, and in real estate, there's other work that needs to be done. You got to research a title. You got to give them a chance to inspect the house, to know what they're buying. Don't have to, but if you want to get full money, I would think that people want to know what they're buying.
So I think the trade-off that you're going to have in this scenario is I think you are probably going to end up with a more qualified buyer. If they're bidding, they're more likely to have money, which is great. But I think, maybe you get 5 people that are auctioning that you're dealing with versus maybe you drive it up more on a standard real estate side with maybe 20 or 25 people involved instead of just the 5, because on the traditional side, not to say that they couldn't get a lender involved and do that on the auction side, but I think it lends itself more towards cash. And if you are at a house, if it's a lower end property with a lower value, maybe you don't have to worry about that as much. But if you are auctioning off a $400,000 house, you're going to have a smaller pool of people with enough money to walk in the door and put out that cash, but they're going to be more qualified. So there's the trade-off.
Typically, I've been involved in real estate auctions on both sides, more as a buyer. And I think, to Joe's point, there was a huge auction in Nashville, Indiana that sold a bunch of properties several years ago. We actually had to get a number to bid, we had to verify our net worth and a letter of credit from the bank. Plus, we had to pay $5,000 just to enter the room. And if you didn't win anything, they handed you back your certified check. And so, yes, you're right, Joe. The people sitting in that room, while there was only 8 or 9 people, were all definitely financially qualified because they had to meet certain hurdles to even get to the auction in this particular case, the last one that I went to.
There is a lot of, in talking with other auctioneers from other states, there is a lot of educating of the seller and educating of the real estate community which would be involved, because there a number of it's a different type of sales mechanism. But also in Indianapolis, as an example, there is kind of a stigma of auctions where foreclosed houses go to auction and HUD homes and tax sales, and it's a place where you go and you have to pay cash, but you're going to get a discount because it's going to auction off, and it's a discount mentality, when in fact the retail situations where people choose to auction houses off, they often get higher hammer prices than the listing prices. It actually can work the opposite way. So it's an interesting idea. I think there's something to it. I think for some people it will work. For some properties it will be a good alternative. Perhaps not for every house. And a lot of people are comfortable. We're learning through the other conversations we're having in real estate right now, a lot of people are comfortable with the way things have been, and they just don't want to muddy the water.
Yeah. So for those listening out there that maybe aren't familiar with auction, Colin, you've used the word hammer price twice. Explain to them out there what that actually is.
Well, traditionally, an auction the auctioneer has a hammer, and when they come to the end and the final offer is, they give a fair warning. Typically, they'll say going once, going twice, and then they hammer, and that's the end of the auction. The item is sold.
So that's
the
the
hammer
final
price is the final offered price.
And in that scenario that you were mentioning, that seller gets that number, whatever it is. That's the hammer price. But that's almost like the net number because he's not paying any bills out of that.
That's correct. Now, I will tell you, I've been reading real estate agreements from other auctioneers, and they all have a lot of legalistic talk, of which one always has a line item that says that the seller has the opportunity not to even accept that, which I think that should be known up front, but that would be, we're not, maybe it didn't hit a reserve or it didn't hit a number that the seller is going to be okay with. They have an option to basically veto that sale.
Oh, that's interesting. So what is this a mechanism by which a real estate agent could take advantage of the auction? Because the one thing I don't want to do, especially in this podcast, since we're all licensed, is cut out a real estate agent. So this could be done in conjunction with a real estate kind of transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I am seeing them work in other parts of the country is that the buyers pay a premium to the auctioneer, and that auctioneer is going to pay a real estate agent that created the listing. Now, a lot of them are real estate agents, so they're getting the listings from the states and from other things. And then they say, do you want us to help you sell the house? So they, in fact, are their own agents, and they're going to make a real estate commission. But let's say an agent thought they would like to try auctioning off a house. They would negotiate payment to themselves with the auctioneer. And then effectively, they would outsource the transaction. I mean, the attraction to the real estate agent would be, like you and I discussed, more of an outsourcing where I'm going to let the auctioneer take over. I'm going to let the auctioneer market the house. They've got an audience of people. They're going to get people there. It's going to be an event. And then I'm just going to sit back, let them sell the house, and I'm still going to collect a payment, much like maybe when you go to a builder with a real estate agent. They kind of say, hey, we'll pay you, just kind of stay out of our way and let this thing unfold.
So in a scenario like that, can an agent bring the buyer to the deal? Would they pay the buyer's agent?
I think they could. Now that's going to be under the new rules. That's going to be negotiated as well. So I would say if you had buyers interested in a house that was marketed as an auction, just like they were calling any seller, they would want to call the auctioneer or call the party in charge and negotiate a payment. Hey, I'll bring my buyer and they're already qualified.
Couldn't they pay them if there's a buyer's premium? Let's say they put a buyer's premium on 5%, which seems to be really low right now. That could actually go towards that agent, right? So the buyer's actually paying their own agent in a sense, because they're paying the hammer price plus 5% buyer's premium, and that 5%, that auctioneer could turn around and go, hey, Mr. Buyer's agent, you're going to get 3 of that for bringing the buyer to the auction. So it could still work in essence that agents could bring their buyers to auction. And I think that's in our field, that's always a worry about, well, I don't want to go to an auction because if my buyer buys at auction, I don't get paid.
Well, and then theoretically, in this new world of, but everyone should have been before, but now that they have to fill out that buyer's agency agreement, theoretically, they could place their bid along with that as well. We want to pay $400,000 for this house, but we're going to pay $410,000 because $10,000 of that needs to go to my
I
Or
think
they could pay them aside from it too. They could work that out and get that from their client as well, theoretically.
I think that there's another step I should mention. There is actually something called pre-bids. So if an auction is going to happen at noon on a Friday, there could be a pre-bid in place where somebody says, "Look, I know you expect the house is going to go for 400. We're offering 380. Here's our offer," and it's considered a pre-bid. So the auction will still take place, and the other participants may or may not even realize that the 380 is already floating out there. And if the auction doesn't reach that pre-bid, that would be one way that a buyer could participate.
Would that be like the opening bid? Would the auctioneer say, "Hey, we've already got a bid at 380. We've got to start there and go up"?
The auctioneers have the discretion really a lot of discretion to make that known or not make it known. And it all depends. There are different strategies. Sometimes when you come into a house and you say, "Wow, this house is worth 400 and they're going to start it at 200. I feel like I have a chance to get this house for 250,000. So that attracts people on the hope that they are going to get in on a value that isn't, so the strategy of the auctioneer is to get the most participants in and get the highest price for the sale. Because the seller is their client, so they want to get the highest price they can to get the most money to that client of theirs. Right. So whatever they decide is the right strategy is what they're going to do. They may publish that, they may not publish that number.
With the technology that's there now, do you see a lot of, like Meekum's a good example. I've watched it before. You see people in the audience bidding live, but there's constantly people working the computer where people are out of state bidding. So you've got two varying technologies going. Is that something you guys use in your business, or is that make it harder or easier?
Yeah. Well, most items are auctioned online. People don't want to come in person. Some people do, but being online, it allows you you can attend 10 auctions in a day and things you can't physically do. So a lot of people like the technology aspect of it. On the auctioneer side, I'm just talking about from my wife's business point of view, you've got to have extra staff, you've got to have other things, so that causes a business expense that is different than not having those things. So because somebody's got to be there monitoring that, and the auctioneer has a lot of things going on that they are trying to coordinate really for one moment in time where everything's going to culminate in a sale. So those things are there. That's why the buyer, the premium, you might see a variation. If you're buying furniture or something, it might be 25, 35% that the seller's going to pay, and then the buyer's going to pay a premium. But if something's going to go for $100 and there's got to be two people online watching it, and they need to make 30 or 40 bucks to make that worth the time to go through all that expense.
Right.
Whereas on a house, it's obviously a bigger ticket. So you might be looking at, something like a 10% buyer's premium. Now the seller is the client of the auctioneer. They aren't really going to care because the buyer's going to pay it. But in the end, it does affect how much money the buyer has to bring, and it affects the price.
Typically in the one that I was at, where I was in the buyer side, the auction price, you had to put down 10% the day of the auction, and then you had 30 days, but financing was not a condition. If you couldn't get your financing, you lost the money you put down. That is one area that I think tends to make buyers shy away, because we all know, especially you, Colin, being in the mortgage world, that very few actually happen in 30 days. Something happens and we need 4 or 5 more days. And that potential risk is a detriment to a lot of buyers going, "Hey, I know I can get a loan, but if something happens and I lose,
That is a risk in every real estate transaction, though, because if you need to extend a contract a week because something happened, the sellers have the option not to do that, right? So they're making the decision of, okay, do I want to wait another 30, 45 days, market the property again, risk getting a lower offer? Those exist on every real estate transaction. It's not any different in an
Well,
auction.
yeah, right. But I will tell you that in the real estate world, that extension is usually pretty much guaranteed the first time. I've never been in a position with an auction. I guess they could extend it, but I mean, that's always one of the hard rules. Financing's not a condition. It's got to close in 30 days. I guess the seller could at that point go, but
Yeah.
that's never really marketed that way. And so I think I was always concerned when I was buying to go, man, I don't want to miss that.
Well, the auctioneer is going to have the same discretion on taking what is the best offer. So 400,000 with financing and some risk factors is maybe not the best offer as compared to 390 cash, where there's no risk of that coming apart. So
Yeah.
that's why they have the authority to reject one bid and accept another one.
Yeah. So let's talk about what houses do you think is there a better house? And when I say that, I don't mean the 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Is there a better seller condition that would lend itself to an auction as opposed to the true old-fashioned real estate model?
At first I thought that there were specific houses, but I think about every house is worth considering both options. It really depends on the situation of the seller most. So if I have a house that's vacant and I just want to get rid of it and, I need to guarantee it will be gone in 45 days, that's a good house for an auction because it will sell in 45 days. What price? We don't know, but you'll get it sold. I think a house that's in high demand and a very good retail house, that extra pressure might jump the sale price up. So that might be a good option. I think there's a lot. I think you can make a case for any house. I think that listing it traditionally is a good option, and I think that auctioning it is a good option. So I really see it is when you get to know your customer in the initial conversations, you learn what's the hot button on this transaction, and then that's going to dictate whether we can leave it on the market for a year and wait for our money, or we need to get it moved and sell it in 45 days or whatever.
Joe?
I think the largest hurdle that we're going to have is education. People have been selling houses the same way for so long that it is difficult for them to not have a family member or a trusted advisor that has either purchased or sold a house traditionally through the use of a real estate broker, and they understand that process. I think the challenge is going to be educating them to understand how an auction would function. And I think it's an easier hurdle, obviously, with the seller who, it's real easy to explain to them, hey, all of this money is going to come from a buyer premium. Wherever the gavel hits is what you're going to get. Sit back, relax, get your money, and move on down the road.
Yeah.
But the buyer being educated further, if they are represented by a real estate professional, that person being educated enough to understand how this is working. Like I know within our brokerage right now, we have a person or two that are actually doing sealed bid auctions on homes, and it's very spelled out in the listing. People should understand what's going on, and either A, they aren't reading it, which probably happens, or B, they don't understand what they're reading, so they're getting all kinds of stuff all over the board and not getting it. I think we have got to, if this is going to happen, we've got to get it out there in the world for people to understand it enough to be able to take advantage of it.
Well, that is a really good segue because we're running out of time. But why don't we leave this open? That if you think you want to talk about how this would look and explore this with us, why don't we open up to give us a call with your scenario and let's talk through how it would look.
Yeah.
Call Raymond or Joe or myself, and we will talk about this and talk about both sides, and maybe it would be a fit. And
just leave a comment. We'll reach out.
Yeah, because we do have access to an auctioneer. Obviously, Colin's wife is licensed. So if that's an idea that you want to try or explore, just put something in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to click the subscribe button. That helps everybody out. Click the bell. If you've got questions or comments or want to talk about, if you sold your house by auction, put it in the comment and we can bring it on. And we'd love to have a fourth chair to come in and finish this conversation. I think it's a good idea. I think you're going to start to see more of it because if nothing else, Colin, it is another avenue that a seller could explore when selling their house. They could potentially list it with an agent and have an auction date. And if they sell it before the auction date, then great. If they don't, they can go to auction. And like you're saying, guarantee a hammer price and a deadline. So reach out to us, hit subscribe. Gentlemen, I want to thank you. We'll explore this again. Any closing comments, Joe?
Yes. When you leave comments for us, and we're starting to get several more comments, thank you, first of all, so much for leaving them. But if it isn't a question, please don't expect that we're going to spend a lot of time just commenting on a random comment. Further, and we've seen a few of these comments, yes, I am aware that I am not a tiny human. So leaving comments about the fact that I am not a tiny human doesn't drive anything that we are talking about. So if you could refrain from that, it would be absolutely wonderful, and I thank you.
I'm sorry, Joe. Those were my comments.
Somehow I don't. You, sir.
You, sir.
Let's argue in the arena of ideas with everybody.
Yes.
They want to argue with us.
Colin, last comment.
Have a great weekend. Look forward to talking to everybody about real estate and auctions.
All right. We thank you very much, and we'll see you again on the other side. Have a good
And
day.
as always, harumph.